just like to start off with a simple statement. About a year and a half ago, there's $800 billion of purchases, and by 2021, it would be $1.4 trillion of purchases and 30% of the retail market. That's what millennials represent, and that's what we're going to delve into today. I think millennials were a part of a piece of the conversation in almost every panel. We're going to go really deep into it and really cover some ground here. So it's a very, very important demographic and psychodemographic that every consumer company really has to address, or you're clearly going to be left out. So with that, I want to start with some introductions of this incredible panel that we have. Perhaps Gertude, would you like to start?
Sure. My name is Gertude Allen. I'm currently the CEO of PetPlate. PetPlate is a human-grade dog food delivery service. We deliver human-grade pet food made into prepared meals. It's a subscription-based company. We sell through our website exclusively, and we reach customers in every state in the U.S. We've been in business for a couple of years, growing very fast, very much targeting millennials. And my background is I came to PetPlate through the fund that put the first institutional money in the company 2.5 years ago. So for the first 6 months, I was acting as an investor advisor to the founder, and then the board asked me to join the company as CEO to blend my business background with the founder's operational and technical expertise in the pet food space. And we've grown the team now to 10 full-time people, plus we have a lot of people on the outside helping us. And prior to that, my role, I've always been in food and beverage. My career spans 25 years across CPG, retail, and manufacturing, both in the US and in Europe. So I've been really an operator in companies, but in a couple of instances, I've interacted with investors when we were selling a company, and that's what kind of brought me over to the fund side, where I was primarily doing deal flow and due diligence, which obviously led to PetPlate.
I'm Vlad Chandrovich. Excuse me, I'm a little hoarse. I am head of operations for Lolly Beauty. Lolly Beauty is an organic skincare company. Lolly actually stands for Living Organic Loving Ingredients. So we are a beauty focused almost exclusively on the millennial customer. We're a direct-to-consumer brand at our core, and the three pillars of our business are: we are eco-friendly and sustainable, we are food grade and organic products, and the third piece is customization for the customer. So we have different ways that we're testing that in the market, whether it be through experiential retail like pop-up blending bars where we're custom blending beauty products for customers, or in online where we're using a chatbot to give custom recommendations based on our beauty products.
My name is Jesse Pleiner. I am Chief Operating Officer for Myro. Myro is a direct-to-consumer deodorant company. We sell right now online, but we'll also be scaling into other channels over the next 12 months. I basically handle all operations and also product development. What makes our product unique is we really push the envelope on the formula side. Some people say all natural. I don't even know if you're allowed to claim that, but we kind of push it as far as you can go, both from an efficacy standpoint and user experience standpoint. And on the hardware side, we kind of developed a little bit of a Harry's type of model, where Harry's, you get a sexy shaver stick and replacement blades. We give you a sexy deodorant container, and we ship you replacement pods. Prior to Myro, my background was running a consumer electronics company for 6 years. I lived in China, set up supply chains, have developed complicated consumer electronics products where I've sold them to various retailers. And between Myro and that and Prong, which was the consumer electronics company, I did various consulting for other consumer electronics brands, and also had the opportunity to bring products to market in the textiles and knitwear industry. So,
Fantastic. Thank you, Jesse. My name is Pennington. I've been in consumer products for well over 35 years. I've worked for some of the large consumer companies such as Claro, Revlon, Giorgio Armani, Valentino, Calvin Klein, HBA beauty manufacturer, beauty care manufacturing, cosmetics, so a lot of different companies. Right now I'm the managing director of Cardinal Strategy Group. We do focus on consumer companies, but other companies as well. Our specialty is looking at companies that are underperforming, undergoing some kind of stress, or perhaps being challenged in other ways. And we bring two solutions to the table. We are a independent sponsor, bringing capital. We also bring management and board advisory to the table. In fact, I'm currently engaged with a $100 million toy company as their CEO in that capacity. So with that, let's begin. Jesse, I'm going to start with you. We're talking about millennials, so we're going to talk about millennials, but also around them. How much of a consumer base are millennials for your business? I mean, is it a big portion, a small portion?
Yeah.
What comprises your customer base right now?
I mean, our sole focus is millennials. Like everything that we do on the creative side, everything that we do on the marketing side really is to kind of tailor everything to the millennial audience. Obviously, our initial way that we're really monetizing the product is through digital channels. Millennials obviously are a huge, they buy a lot of stuff through the digital channels, and so by kind of exploring different digital channels that are out there and scaling them and obviously maximizing them, we're able to reach a huge millennial audience. And I would say from the branding side, every branding decision has the millennial in mind. And just to kind of go into a couple of examples, when you're developing a digital product, you have this iterative process that you go through as whether it's a website or an app, you're really kind of user testing and everything like that in a very rapid way. And that's one of the things that I really have kind of come to incorporate on the product development side for the physical product, is trying to take that same rapid prototyping iterative process and bring it from the software side into the hardware side. And we're able to make a lot more educated decisions on both from a product development standpoint and from an operational standpoint.
Incredible. Vlad, how about you?
Yeah, I actually want to piggyback on that because it's a really new concept. I think it's really promising, but it's hard to get right. The idea of iterating physical product on the fly. And that's what we do with our pop-up blending bars, is that we're able to blend for customers on site, which is great on the one hand because we're selling product, but it's also very hard in that physical space to generate any profit. What we're actually doing is we're able to capture data on the customers, and we're also able to quickly workshop new products on the fly. So that gives us the opportunity to, yes, it's a great retail opportunity, it's a great sales channel, but on the other hand, it also gives us the opportunity to test on the go different products, different ingredients, different formulations, so it's really relevant, I think, especially today to millennials, because they're so discerning. Everything that they want it to be customized, they want it to be very much catered to their individual needs. And then you'll have, and this is again relevant to us, you'll have somebody come in and they will want a product, they want it with as few ingredients as possible, they want it to be as pure as possible, they want it to be organic, and they want it to not have one specific ingredient. So what we did is we have the bare bone base products that we have, and then we power them up with individual single note ingredients on top of that, so people have that flexibility, and they're not tied into this very long inky statement of a formula that you can't read or make heads and tails of, which unfortunately is most of the beauty industry.
Yeah, and I would even kind of say that the category we're in, human grade pet food, probably wouldn't exist today if it weren't for millennials. It's a very big departure from the way pets have been fed for the last 50 years, which is, shelf-stable kibble. And, it would take a mindset like the millennial has to understand the distinction between, the $29 billion of mass pet food that's out there and this burgeoning category of human grade pet food, to know that, this is really a next level kind of experience for their pet, which is likely going to extend the pet's life and make the time you have with your pet more enjoyable. And that's the premium that millennials place on not just pets, but a lot of different things in their life, where they value experiences generally more than they do material goods. So they're just going to pour money into things that are going to enrich the experience they have in the case of pets. And obviously food is a very big part of caring for your pet. So I would say, without the millennial mindset, human grade pet food probably wouldn't have taken off. I will say, interestingly enough, it's not our sole focus. It's not 100% of our customer base. I would say it represents about 50% of our base. And I would say we target an older millennial. The reason being that you need a certain amount of disposable income to be able to purchase our products. So this would be a millennial that is typically in a serious relationship, and they're treating their dog as sort of their first child, you know, a precursor to a human child. And so it's an older millennial. The other big market that we do have is empty nesters. So while I said this market exists because of the millennial mindset, it doesn't exist just for them. The reason that we find that the empty nesters are interested in our product is sort of, it's interesting because, you know, we're catering basically to empty nesters and really their children, like kind of their older children, because what empty nesters are experiencing when their children leave the home is a void and an emptiness that they kind of fill with pets. But this time they treat this pet probably differently than they did their first pet 20 years prior when they had little kids. They're treating the second pet the way they did their own children. And so the buying habits are actually very similar and the priorities are similar. And what we need to do in terms of our brand is make sure that we appeal to both. And even though there's a generational gap, we have found ways of using kind of the millennial as the starting point for our brand strategy, but making sure that it doesn't alienate this other very important audience, but instead it becomes almost like an aspirational brand for an older audience.
Vlad, you mentioned in your response that your business, you cater to the individual needs of millennials, the consumer. It's slightly different than a traditional business model, say with baby boomers, where you know this is the product, you want it or not. Maybe you can talk a little about millennials in terms of how they buy right now and how you market to them versus perhaps a baby boomer or Gen Xer. What are some of the fundamental things that are different? How do they contrast?
Yeah, this is kind of where millennials are not so fun. They're really, really hard to market to. It's a heavily oversaturated industry. The channels that they're present in, there's just too much noise in them. And then if you're trying to stand out in the noise, you start to lose a lot of the brand integrity that people want to invest in. So the first point on that is trust. Millennials want to trust a brand. They want to trust an influencer. They want to trust a brand. They want to invest in a story. They want to invest in a cause. They don't necessarily care about, and we talked about this a little bit at the first panel, I think Sam brought this up, where we don't necessarily want to invest in the label. It's a matter of what is the story that I'm standing behind. And I also think that millennials have less spending power than some of their predecessors did. And for the third year in a row, we see the human lifespan is actually decreasing. So there's a chance they're going to live a lot less than some of their older shopping categories. So it's a changing dynamic. And to answer your question, like how do you market to them? You certainly do it through social channels. You do it through podcasts that we've seen a lot of success with. But also podcasts now command some of the highest CPMs that you see in any industry. That's $30 to $50 CPM versus like $1 to $2 in some of the other industries. So you're spending a lot more to market to the millennial. And yeah, the reason that they're there is they were first to market. They were first to really adapt to the digital channels, and they weren't necessarily the best for doing it. So we'll see where it develops from there.
Yeah, it's truly the first digital generation. Gertude, how about you? In terms of how marketing to millennials, what do you see as some of the major contrasts with maybe the previous generation or even baby boomers?
Yeah, I mean, the term we often refer to in our company is storytelling. You know, the millennial really like to be engaged and not just marketed to, but they want to be part of that process. So if you look at our ads on Facebook and Instagram are really like very dynamic, and they tell a story from start to finish. And you know, whether it's a sponsored ad or just an organic post that we boost, it really takes the viewer through kind of this life cycle in 30 seconds of how a dog or a pet parent experiences our product. So it's not a very like forward, you know, here it is, you know, take it or leave it. It's really about like inviting them in to try to experience it through, you know, the point of view of this third party. And so we did a big, we were launched in beginning of 17. By the end of 18, we realized we had to do a rebrand to focus more on millennials, because that's where we could see, you know, the business was really gonna develop. And so we wanted the aesthetic to feel more modern and, you know, more millennial focused. But we also knew that we had to develop a brand language that would allow us to have that level of engagement. And so the brand attributes of our new brand are dog equals human, pleasure, and ease or convenience. So that's maybe not what you would necessarily think of when you think pet food, things like pleasure, you know, but we knew that it had to be very, like, we had to talk on a very emotional level to millennials versus like an academic level, which I think a baby boomer might appreciate. But what we find again and again is, again, the, you know, the empty nester / baby boomer, they're not, they don't shy away from that either. I mean, they actually enjoy it. So it's you know, it doesn't really, you know, offend them that we want to, you know, be much more open book about the way we sell our business. So I don't think it's not mutually exclusive, which is lucky for us.
Yeah. Jesse?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the way that millennials are buying products is a lot different than the way baby boomers were buying products. Baby boomers are a lot more brand loyal. Millennials, you have to continue to sell them. Like in subscription businesses, we think in terms of CAC and stick rates. I mean, you got to earn your stick rates even after the first time they you know, get their next shipment. So they're if another company comes along or another good story comes along, they're more than happy to kind of jump ship and go test out someone new. Whereas a baby boomer, and I mentioned this on the call we had, you know, I have a friend who's working in the linen category, and you know, they you know, as someone from New Jersey or, you know, some family in their you know, older parents like came and had like this online digital experience and got this great out-of-box experience at their door. It was the first time they ever had that type of experience with this type of product, and they'll never buy another brand because this brand delivered that experience, so they're good. Whereas a millennial, they understand that there could be different options that kind of provide those different experiences, and so they're happy to continue to, yeah, I'm gonna enjoy this while it's here right now, but I have my eye open on what's next, because I have to hold this brand accountable or make sure that they're continuing to deliver. Completely agree on you know, with Vlad and Gertrude on the storytelling. Like, you gotta have a story, you gotta, I mean, social impact is great. Sometimes you kind of have to dance this fine line where you need to deliver the social impact story, but you also have to consider the bottom line impact, because a lot of the social impact things that you could do with a brand, whether it's sustainability, sometimes are not in line with the most profitable decision that you can make. So you kind of have to thread that needle a little bit. But I would say that in general, obviously digital channels are highly important, and it's not one specific digital channel. You have to be everywhere. They have to be kind of, everything has to be feeding each other. You have to think about your digital strategy in a holistic way where, you know, maybe PR is not driving any conversions, but in general, maybe it's bringing down your cost per acquisition on the, you know, Instagram side, because people have better brand awareness over there. So you really just have to be in every single place, and obviously monitoring those things and have a really good creative solution, whether internally or externally, that allows you to really A/B test really quickly.
So there's really not too much brand loyalty, what we used to traditionally call brand loyalty. I mean, as you see, they're more, millennials are more comfortable, I guess, even if they have a good experience, just to keep that door open for another brand.
They definitely, you got to continue to work for the relationship is number one. And I was reading something in the last couple of days where the millennials are developing these micro businesses, and you know, where the Procters and Gambles and the Unilevers of the world can't compete, because the millennials are just not interested in what those people have to sell, no matter what they're selling. They want this little boutique business on Etsy or whatever it is. They want to get their solution from that. And so, yeah, they're always looking for, you know, that, you know, the story, or yeah, the personalization, you know, whatever you can offer. They're open to testing something new.
Gertrude, let's talk a little about social media. And when we think about social media, we immediately think millennials, but we all engage in social media in one form or another. But in terms of your business model and your marketing and how you approach reaching out to millennials, how important is the social media networks, be it Facebook, Instagram, however many different platforms there are out there?
Yeah, I mean, it's incredibly important, and I'd say as much for brand awareness as it is for third-party validation. So, you know, my I went to NYU and I studied journalism, but my specialty was public relations. And back then, there was a very strong protocol as to how you would pitch the press to get your product placed in stories, and that's really faded. The ability to control how much press you get today is just so limited that you have to really take it into matters into your own hand, and you work with these influencers, some micro influencers, macro influencers, bloggers, affiliates, and you feed them the information you want to appear on their sites, on their channels, and if not for that, then any paid social media you do is going to be too expensive. So sort of to Jesse's point, it really does take multiple touch points, and you can maximize your ability to convert eyeballs into sales in social media if they see other people talking about your brand. Like if it's all coming from the company, again, speaking again to what Jesse just said, there's going to be a lack of trust, a lack of credibility, and the millennial customer is going to view the brand as too superficial. So so an influencer that has 10,000 followers is very valuable to us if they in that small community can speak to their actual experience, and the followers know that this is a mom or a housewife or something, and they're not a big corporate person. They really believe what they're saying, and quite frankly, the blogger is being genuine. I mean, they're not gonna pretend that the dog likes the food. So it's really got to happen, and all of this has to bubble up, and it's a numbers game. It's about how many of those micro influencers can you engage, and at some point you get big enough to, in our case, we have been able to engage a couple of what we would call macro influencers that have 500,000 followers or more. And what will happen, and this is another thing that we're starting to see, is then it starts to spill into traditional press. So, Newsweek contacted us last month, and they're sampling the product, and they're going to write a story. But I don't think it would have happened had somebody at Newsweek not seen a few influencers writing about pet plate. So it is like an ecosystem. It's all connected.
Yeah. How much control do you have over that? I mean, it seems to me that it's really the community that's doing this. It's almost like other people, your customers are doing the marketing for you.
So let me, for the operators in the room, you'll appreciate this. So we have a customer experience team. So it's not customer service, it's customer experience. And they do a lot of blocking and tackling. So every comment that appears on social media, anywhere, they are responding to it in the same way that if somebody calls in and says there's a problem with my shipment or I need to change my work, it's the same level of priority as a phone call about an actual, business situation. A comment is taken very, very seriously. If you ignore them, you're dead in the water. You have to, so you literally have to employ people to manage that.
Sounds like a fun job. Work for you doing that. Vlad, how about you? The social media impact on your business?
It's funny because we have two people that are doing just that. They're responding to DMs. They're responding not just to standard customer emails and calls. They're actually actively engaged with the community, and not just that in messages that are directly geared towards us. Anywhere that our company is mentioned in social media, they jump in there and they're commenting and they're interacting. Because building a community is critical. So you have no choice. If you're not directly engaged with them, then you're seen as somebody who's disengaged and you don't really care. It's disingenuous. So it's hard. I want to piggyback on what Jesse said, where like small is becoming the new big. So you have really small companies. I come from Chanel, where I started my career, and we saw just continuously the small niche markets where players were taking complete market share from us. So it was not any single threat that we had to face. It was a lot of these smaller players that are really attacking one very specific part of the business, the big mascara company, the big shoe company. So it was not, you're no longer, it's death by 1,000 paper cuts really if you're one of the larger players. And when I went into this world, it's a totally different dynamic, but it's interesting how you can start with minimal investment. You can use G Suite instead of Google, instead of Excel, and then you have basically the full infrastructure in place to then grow and attack some of the bigger players. The barrier to entry is so small that just about anybody can get into the space, and unfortunately everybody is getting into the space. So again, it's noise and it's an issue. But yeah, we're seeing this across all industries. Craft beer is the biggest thing that's happening right now in the alcohol world. So this is not new necessarily to any single industry. People want different flavors. They want very specific tastes that probably to the majority is terrible. So it's a unique dynamic that's developed.
And you think millennials are driving that engine behind that?
Yeah, again,
It's just technology.
It's technology, and it just so happens that millennials were really the first to use it. I don't think we're the best to use it, and I looked this up before we came up. So I look at the high jump world record. In 1895, it was 6 feet 5 inches. Today, well, in 1995, 100 years later, it was over 8 feet. Does that mean that the first high jumper was the best high jumper? No. So if they were the ones that were in charge of what the high jump would look like for the next 100 years, it would actually be a really regressive way to look at the high jump. We're seeing this constantly shifting and constantly evolving economy. And what we're also seeing happen is that it's always going to be in this state of change. There's never going to be a new normal anymore. It's always going to be a state of flux throughout the whole sphere. This is the new normal.
Quite amazing. Jesse, how about you with social media? I mean, I guess your company is social media probably plays an integral role in what you do.
Yeah, well, firstly, I would disagree slightly with Gertrude, whereas I would probably respond to the people online a lot faster than someone who called me on the phone, because they're talking in front of, potentially hundreds of thousands of people, and you just want to put that fire out as fast as possible. So, but definitely, I mean, they're coming from all angles, so I definitely agree with that. So a couple things. Number one is, like, to your point, there's a lot of, the barriers to entry have been reduced significantly. And there is a lot of noise out there, which makes it all the more important where at every position that you have in a company, well, first of all, when you launch a company in this space, when I say this space, I mean in like targeting millennials or in the digital space, you need to know what your objective is. Like, do you want to be, for example, I have a friend who's on 34th Street with his feet up on his coffee table doing $20 million a year in mattress sales. And then there's Casper. So like, they're both running great businesses. I mean, I don't know Casper's bottom line, but like, they both have different objectives, both running great businesses, and they both built their, teams and businesses accordingly. So you need to understand like where you're looking to go and then kind of dial that back. Number two is when you're building your executive team, you need people who've been there before, especially on the marketing side. I would call them snipers. Like, you need these people who just know exactly like how to get this stuff done. And both on the paid side, on the content side, every step in the game, because it's a high stakes game when you're playing in the digital marketing space, and you could have $100,000 and it could go like that, and you get nothing for it. And you have the right person driving that budget, they understand how to deploy it in a way where you see the ROI. I think generally speaking, if you're going to launch a brand in this space, like this is what I think a lot of brands, the first step that they do when they decide that they want to launch a product is they set up a fake website. They put up pictures of a product, like I'll use towels, for example, or deodorant. So, we set up a fake website, fake brand, put a picture of deodorant on it, said it was all natural, plant powered, whatever it was, signed up for a subscription, went and took a couple $1,000s out of Instagram ads, drove traffic to the site, and took credit card transactions, and were able to gather without even, with like terrible branding, no PR, like, or I don't even think our checkout worked barely, but like you can still submit your credit card, and now we understand like all these metrics, cost per acquisition, we have a point of view on that. Average order value, we have a point of that. Like, what all these different things that now, that's how important social media is the first thing you do when you decide to start a company, before you even have branding, before you probably even filed your legal papers to have like an entity, is you go ahead and you set up a fake website and run a dry run and see if there's something there.
It's pretty incredible. And I guess like we come full circle on barriers to entry. I mean, it's that simple to do.
By the way, we returned all their money the next day and said we'll be paid in 6 months. So we didn't take their money.
But that's amazing, the barriers to entry to do something like that and then actually get a foot into the door. And Jesse, let me just extend that a little bit. We talked about social media. And when we think about consumer products, we think about retail, brick and mortar. But really the web-based sales are much, much higher in growth than brick and mortar, and mobile sales are much, much higher than online sales, and as a general category. in your business, and particularly in your business model, how important is mobile sales, and you're riding a wave of growth on the mobile sales, which ties into, again, the millennials, because they're so comfortable using it. So mobile technology, how is that driving your business model?
I mean, huge. I mean, when you design your user experience on the website, you're thinking mobile first, and then you're thinking, you know, desktop or laptop second. So like, you know, you're optimizing the entire user experience for mobile. I would say, you mentioned retail, like I would say that, you know, as much as, you know, I don't know how people feel about retail, but like retail is very important and very valuable. I mean, the marketing power of these retailers is massive. You know, you get into a Target, you get into a Best Buy, you see these brands like Harry's and Quip, you know, get into Target now. I think, you know, Native deodorant just launched in Walmart recently, also Target. Like, the lift you get online just from the recognition of, like, it's powerful to put a TV commercial out there and say, now being carried in Target. So even though that person might now go online and buy the product, it's almost like that's huge validation even for the millennial audience.
So for millennials, brick and mortar is still really important?
100%.
I mean, the myth is they're so digital and tech savvy, they'll just sit in their room in their underwear, just buying everything, but they really
Yeah.
shop the stores.
I think this goes to what was said earlier around, you know, most, there was I don't know, I'm not up to date on exactly what the metrics are, but I think like 80% of consumers read online reviews and like 90% trust the reviews they read, or something, like something astounding where they just look at reviews. But I don't know what those numbers are as it relates to like seeing a mass retailer next to your company, but it definitely gives you lift even on the digital channels.
And Carter, I would just say, like, in pet food, it's easy to get kind of lulled into thinking you should just focus exclusively online, but in pet food, it's a $30 billion category, and we always talk about how online sales is the fastest growing channel. It's gonna grow, you know, much faster than offline sales. In fact, analysts say that the current online sales will triple in the next 10 years, but when you break the numbers down, of the $30 billion category, $1.5 billion is purchased online. So even when it triples in 10 years, it'll be $4.5 billion. By then, pet food overall will be $35 billion. So the question is, if you really believe in your category as a growth driver, do you want to sit out the other, you know, $30 billion of potential market share you could get? Now, it's a tricky thing to evolve from a digitally native brand into a CPG, you know, retail-oriented brand. It requires a shift in our supply chain, in our distribution network, in our staffing. So it's not something we can do easily. We'll have to really slowly work our way into it, but we can do it with like small test markets, start with the independent retailers that are, they have a propensity to carry novel products in their stores, so they'll cooperate with us, and we won't have to go through all the intermediaries we would if we were to launch in a big, superstore. But, you know, it does need to be looked at, and, you know, I think what Jesse's saying is correct. Like, yeah, millennials are still people that live in the real world and do go into stores, and they learn about products offline, even though they are spending a lot of time online. When you go into any supermarket or drugstore, you have 1,000 products right in front of you. So it can be just an awareness driver as well. And we feel like with our product, because we are so driven by subscription, I will say the one differentiation I would make, you know, to sort of what my panelists said, my fellow panelists said, is that while brand loyalty may have waned with this generation, in the case of dog food, it's actually a very, very sticky product. It's like the one product that consumers don't want to switch. They don't want to vary. It's actually really bad for the dog's digestive system to switch to dog food. So if it works, it's a very sticky product. But we do really feel like this is a great product to be advertised on the shelf. And if it's something the consumer wants in their life, they're going to probably turn to a subscription like ours, because it's going to get shipped right to their door. It's very heavy, it's bulky. Who wants to drag that home every week from a supermarket? So I think it's really about trying to figure out that right hybrid approach.
And I would add one thing to what you said, which might be the most complicated thing with going to retail, is your pricing strategy.
Yeah.
Because a lot of these direct-to-consumer businesses who are selling online, what really gets them to break through is the fact that they don't need to bake in retail margins, and they can almost sell direct-to-consumer at the at the wholesale
Yeah.
price.
Right.
And if you're gonna go to retail, now maybe you're gonna write it off as a marketing expense or something like that, but you really need to think through both from a pricing strategy and SKU offering standpoint
Yeah.
to make sure that you're not jeopardizing, because as soon as Target sees it on Amazon or anywhere else for lower, you're in
Yeah.
trouble.
Yeah, that's true.
Unless you come out with some special SKU that
Yeah,
you
just
can't
for
find
that.
in either.
Yeah, for sure.
Vlad, how about your company in terms of the mobile versus brick and mortar? I mean, how does your business model address that, and particularly the growth in the mobile purchase?
I mean, so the one thing that I will say is that the challenge is not, will retail be around in 20, 30 years? Of course it will, because the real estate is there and somebody is going to make something successful in that real estate. Right now we're seeing that there's a lot of experiential stuff that's happening in these spaces. So whether it be escape from the room type team building places to going in there and trying out products. What we're challenged with right now is bridging the gap between retail and our website. So we know who our customer is online. We've tracked them through our targeting campaigns and our retargeting campaigns. How do we then track them through the physical environment? How do we know that the person that walks in the store has a certain psychographic and has shopped our product before or is a loyal user of our product? So that's the first bucket of things that we're trying to figure out. The second piece that we're trying to understand is also how do you turn retail, right now we're seeing, I've heard this term used, it's called a retailtainment, where it's kind of like a clown show. You walk in there and everybody's just trying to impress you with the next big thing, but there's no profitability to generate off of that. So you'll get people into the store, but you're not really selling much. So the question is, how do you then take whatever you're doing in your store and make it special? I think Sephora has done it really, really well, because it is a ritual to go and shop in Sephora. And we see it in the beauty industry, but very few have done it right. Being a Sephora member means that you are part of an exclusive club, you're always going to get exclusive samples, and it's open, and the store will be everywhere in the country. So at least in the US market, they've done that really, really well. And they've been able to bridge that gap because they own the retail channel and they own the digital channel. So I think they're a really good model, but it's also, they're number one, they're on top right now. So how do you do it as a smaller brand? Do you do it through pop-ups? Do you do it through pop-in stores? Like we're doing a partnership with Macy's for April. So how do you still capture the customer? How do you engage directly with the customer, but then bridge that into the digital sphere? So those are the questions that if we had the answer, we'd be $1 billion company right now.
Well, you'll get there. I'm confident. Well, Vlad, let me just carry this a little bit forward. We started talking during our talks. We brought up a few times about social consciousness of how millennials see their purchases. That it's not just buying something; it's also making a statement, or at least believing in something that you're buying. For example, both Walmart and Whole Foods have run in various times promotions on sustainability, on raising money for breast cancer research, on fair trade for coffee growers, and this attracts millennials, and this is important to them. In your company, do you use those kinds of marketing strategies, and how critical is it in terms of your whole marketing offering?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely invest more than some companies would. Everything down to our labels that we're purchasing, we're paying probably 5 to 10 times what a regular label would cost because ours is compostable. So you want to make sure that you are telling a whole 360-degree story about your whole brand. So everything from the supply chain, and it's really all a marketing opportunity. So you can look at it as an added cost to the cost of goods, or you can look at it as this is the first part of our marketing story that we're telling. So yes, we're going to pay a lot more for these labels, but that is, we get a multiple of that in the marketing story that's told off of that. Our ingredients are themselves, they're upcycled from the food industry. So we work with a small farm in southern France that makes something called an Ente plum. They turn it into a prune, and they used to throw out the pit. Well, we worked with them to take the pit of that plum, cold press it, and make it into an oil that's used in our hero SKU. So every step of the supply chain journey is actually an opportunity to tell a better marketing story And I think that a lot of brands are really getting savvy to that right now, and customers love that. So for us, the biggest challenge is how do we tell all of the stories that we're really focusing on right now.
Discussion?
Yeah, I would just say similarly, it can't be seen as just a bolt-on, like, you know, to prop the company up. It has to feel very natural, very authentic, integrated. It is hard to do, I think, as a small company. I think Jesse may have said this, it's, you know, how do you prioritize and allocate budget when you're trying to grow the company? You need working capital like crazy, and then to start giving it away is difficult. So what we tend to do is we try to distribute our product because there's a great need for it, and I think it's a double benefit to us. I mean, we're doing good for society by giving away this wonderful product to dogs in need, but it's also elevating the brand. It's getting the message out there, and the tricky part is that, you know, this is such a, pet food obviously is such a big category, and there's such big players that they have really sewed up a lot of relationships. So some of the bigger rescue centers, adoption centers, shelters, et cetera, they can't take our food because they're tied in with Nestle or Purina. But, you know, when you look hard enough, you find the little ones that are very happy to take it, and it's, you know, it's still part of that story of, like, we're small and we're helping the ones that are small and don't have access to the big pet food companies. So you just have to do it in a very clever and a very genuine way.
That's real authentic.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
Jesse, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, we, for Myro, we're focused on sustainability. Obviously, the delivery system that we have, we've done, you know, UL and Intertech tests against like typical containers on the market, and we're reducing plastic by some percentage depending on who you're benchmarking us against. And then on the formula side, you know, I would say all of our ingredients are like plant powered, so to speak, with, you know, you mean on the personal care side with ingredients, it's a very complicated conversation, but in general, like, you know, you really, either in some cases, like naturally derived ingredients are even better than quite better than all natural ingredients. But in general, we're focused on making sure that we're delivering a clean and healthy experience to customers. But again, I would really come back to, you know, the brand story is critical when you're targeting this audience, but you really need to have an understanding of what kind of company you want to have, because if you want to kind of monetize or take advantage of all these stories, it's going to have an impact on your bottom line. And if you're a brand that wants to go mass, then you need to be able to price your product in a way where you're making margin at a reasonable price point. And the more, like, I can't begin to, there's one woman, I love her, but every week she messages me like, when are you going to be using post-consumer recycled plastics? I'm just like, you know, maybe in 2022, like, I don't know, like there's just nothing viable from like both a availability standpoint and an economic standpoint with given the plastics that we're using. But you know, you try to, you understand like what you have, what your goals are from an economic standpoint, what your goals are from a brand standpoint, and you kind of, you know, see what kind of falls into that framework. You put a stake in the ground and you push it from there. So, you know, I think, you know, that's something that we really try to do is the disposable part of our product. We try to use plastics that are as low down on that on the recyclability scale as possible. And now that we have a product in market that's making us money, we can take some bigger swings with the bat. But you know, it's definitely, it's a challenge, and I appreciate the people who push me to try to accomplish more on that.
So you have to strike that balance.
And you know, sometimes you always strive to. I mean, nothing would make me happier than to be able to be like, we have a 100% compostable like product or 100% post-consumer recycled product that, you know, and be able to give everything that they need. But you just, the most important thing is putting the information on the table and letting the team decide. You know, I think that's just, we have to just put the information on the table, because it's not always friendly information.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, it's been interesting for us, I think, working in the direct-to-consumer space. You learn that a whole industry has actually grown around direct-to-consumer brands to support the growth. So what I mean by that is if anything that's perishable, right, that's being shipped direct-to-consumer needs to have a liner to insulate the box so that the food stays cold, or personal care product stays cold. So when we started Pet Plate a couple of years ago, we had something that looked like styrofoam. I mean, it was recyclable-ish, but you know, it basically looked like styrofoam. But today what we use is, it looks like foil, but it's filled with post-consumer denim, so old scraps of denim, and that have been made into these liners, which actually insulate far better than any type of plastic, and is a whole lot cheaper, and is completely, you know, recyclable, and it's already been used before. So, you know, it's an amazing thing, and that liner industry itself has like, if anybody, you know, is looking for a stock tip, I mean, there's some, you know, companies that are really on the rise, because there's just gonna be no end to the amount of liners that will be needed. And when you think about it, you know, 10 years ago, I don't think there was really even a need for that type of liner in a small box, you know. So we've been able to identify little opportunities like that along the way. But yeah, I mean, it needs to, you know, you can't say you're fresh and all natural here and then use something really bad in the box there, definitely.
Yeah, I would also just, one other thing is, the general, I guess, recycling infrastructure really is in the process of getting overhauled. I don't know all of the information or like data around it, but for example, like you see what's happening with straws right now. Like they just don't stay on the conveyor belt. Like I can speak to, we were looking for a way to kind of recycle some plastic in a whatever way. So we contacted a couple of these recycling places. I think there's like 16 recycling hubs in the USA, and or something like that. I might be off, but there's it's not a lot. And we showed them like the product that we wanted to recycle, and he said, well, if it's an inch too small to go through the process, so even though you're using recycled plastics, it can't even go through the process. So now they're starting to bring on new technology into the recycling industry that you don't need to separate plastics, it can get separated automatically, like things like that. But I would say that in general, like there's a lot of effort that's being put in on the front end by people like ourselves, but like there's a lot of issues on the back end that are making a lot of our efforts for lack of a better word.
It has to be that continuity.
Yeah.
You know, you mentioned plastic bags. I'm certainly not millennial, but when I was growing up in the grocery store, you would put everything in a paper bag. And then we were told, well, that's terrible. You're going to lose all the trees. And we got rid of the paper bags, and we got all the plastic bags. Now you can't have the plastic bags.
Right.
Now you have to bring your own bag, which has to be cloth. Otherwise, people look at you kind of funny. So it's interesting how, you know, it evolves. I'm going to change gears just a little bit here. We've been talking a lot about how to market to millennials, how we sell to millennials. Let's talk about hiring millennials. Move to the other side of that coin. I'll start with you, Gertude. What do you think is the kind of corporate environment or work environment that you need to attract millennials, to keep them engaged, to make them long-term employees? And
Yeah.
What's different today that you have to do that?
It's extremely different from where I grew up. You know, we do attract millennials to our company for a variety of reasons. For one thing, we want people who are passionate about what we're doing, and so that, of course, is millennials. As a startup, we can't pay top dollar, so we need to attract younger people who have less of a financial, you know, burden in their lives, and they can take more of a risk with a company like ours and hope to grow with it. So we wind up really with millennials, and they're amazing to work with because of how creative they are. They're very out-of-the-box thinkers. You know, there's no problem they can't solve. There's very, like, barrier to entries really don't exist. The challenge, I would say, on the flip side is that there is a sense of entitlement, you know, broadly speaking. So, you know, it's not uncommon to, like, thank them for coming to work. You know, in my day, it was like, you know, there was so much expected of you, and you were penalized if you, like, stepped out of line just one little inch. And here, you're really constantly praising them and, you know, endorsing them. So, you know, so what happens is you have to create a corporate culture where both can exist, where, you know, people have to feel very autonomous, because if they feel constrained, it'll stamp out their creativity. So you have to create that sense of autonomy, but you also want to keep productivity levels high, and sometimes that means just putting in the hours, which millennials don't love to do, because it goes back to they love experiences. So, like, they don't want work to get in the way of any of their variety of hobbies, you know, hiking, etc. So, you know, like, we have a gal in our office who, you know, her lease got broken early, so she needs to find a new apartment, and at any time of day, in the middle of the day, she has to, you know, she puts it on the team calendar for everybody to see, I'm going to an apartment viewing. like that's normal. And I mean, when I grew up, I just had to find a way to schedule those things outside of work, but it's completely normal and you can't frown upon it. But I will say on the flip side, it wouldn't be unusual for this gal to be online sending emails to me at 10 p.m. at night at all. So obviously it balances out, and it's more about just creating those structures that, you know, productivity and freedom can coexist.
Yeah. Jesse, how about you? In fact, you mentioned earlier that hiring people, for example, in social media, you really have to hire really just experts, and I'm sure they're all millennials. So how's your corporate environment and corporate culture reflect that?
Yeah, I mean, I think number one is this: they really, if you're gonna, when you're hiring, they're obviously the people who are gonna get to see under the hood. So under the hood better be what you're representing your brand is. So it's a way that you're basically holding yourself accountable to what you're marketing. So I think that's, you know, one thing that millennials definitely bring to the table is accountability there. So obviously, you know, being true to what you're representing. As far as how to hire millennials, I mean, I don't know if I would hire a millennial differently than I would hire a person. Or, yeah, I mean, that's it.
I guess they are legal.
Yeah. But, you know, I just think that it's a matter, it's the same thing that I would sell to them, you know, it's a matter of understanding what they are looking for, letting them very clearly know what I'm looking for, and when I the way I guess I'll put that into like real world terms. So I just hired two, millennials. One of them runs product development for me. The other one runs, you know, operations, fulfillment, things like that. And it was very much a conversation of, you know, what are you really good at? Because I need to take advantage of that. What are you looking to do? Like, where are you looking to go? Like, how can I help you get to the next level? What are some experiences you're looking to have this year? And then, you know, kind of setting the table for how we're going to gauge success. And then once you kind of set that table and they're on board, then it's all just a team game. Like, we're on the same team. We're trying to accomplish things together. I'm not your boss. I'm your colleague. Like, let's support each other and just, you know, having a very kind of, I wouldn't call it a, you know, I would think like we're friendly and we can all, you know, one of the, I guess, barometers for hiring someone is whether you can go out to dinner with them. Like, I've sat in multiple hour car rides with these people, and in one case this kid on a 16-hour plane ride. So like, you know, we can get, you know, I think we have good rapport, but I think it's just, you know, treating them like adults and treating them like you have responsibility now, like you have expectations on me, I have expectations on you, and ultimately let's just be a great team and try to accomplish great things together. Really good communication, making sure that there's nothing that could happen from a bad standpoint that you shouldn't feel comfortable bringing to the table. Like, I don't care how bad it is, bring it to the table. Let's dissect it and take care of it as a team. But I just think it's just a matter of you know, in general, just kind of like being respectful of people, like understanding like what they're looking for from a career standpoint, making sure that you're being respectful of their time. Like, you know, I'm not a micromanager, so, you know, like, whatever, if a guy, you know, if he's like, I'm gonna work from home this Friday, like, do whatever you wanna do, dude, I'm just looking at the results. So like, you know, I'm just focused on the big picture, and let's just make sure that we are continuing to have a good working relationship that's continuously getting better. So I guess that's how I would work with anyone.
Early in my career, if I told my boss, oh, I work from home, he would say, you don't have to come back, it's okay. Vlad, how about the corporate culture that you have in your company and how it attracts millennials or keeps them engaged?
I think I think I'm the second oldest person in the company, so it's definitely, it's a unique environment. Look, millennials are people too, and part of it is just...
That's twice we heard that.
To Jesse's point, they and we, I include myself in that group, there's definitely a generational perception, because I look at a Gen Z intern and I think, wow, these people just don't want to work. And it just happens all the time. And then I'm sure if we think back to the beginnings of our career, there was an older person who was sitting down and saying, oh, kids these days don't know how to work. So I feel like this is a story that's as old as time. So there's really, there's that element. But at the same time, millennials are, the fact that they have a lot of these hobbies, the fact that they have all of these varied interests is something that we can leverage to our advantage. One of the best, actually the best customer service person I had, customer experience person I ever had on my team, she was completely connected in the beauty industry. She lived, she breathed, and she slept beauty. So when she started in the consumer customer engagement field, it was effortless. It was the thing she was already doing. So when you find that right person, you put them in the right position, and it no longer feels like work for them. But also, let's remember that this is the first generation that graduated into one of the biggest lies that we've ever been told. So they said, go to college, follow these steps, and then you will be just fine. And then they went to college, they got their English degree with $100,000 in debt, and then they graduated, and this is the very first group that realized it's not fine, and that there are no jobs, and that they don't have any qualifications to have a real job or a skill set. So there's definitely a misperception of what we expected of the younger generations, whichever they are, and then what we've always done in the past, because the things that we've always done just don't work anymore. There was a seismic shift in our whole culture. So it's not millennials, it's that they just happen to be young people graduating in a very complicated time.
Interesting. Well, I'm going to ask the panel just one more question, but after that, we're going to open up for questions from you, so we can maybe think about it. I'm just curious that now we have such incredible talent and experience here, and you're on the front lines, and the millennials is a demographic that's growing rapidly. In just a number of years, who knows how long, there'll be more than half of the purchasing power out there. There'll be the highest earners out there. There'll be the greatest in consumption. So I'll start with you, Jesse. Where do you see this going? Now, we're also talking about Gen Z as well. Where's the future of this? Looking at the front windshield, what do you think this market's going to evolve into? What do you see in the horizon?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the millennials specifically are, I think, if they're not already, going to be the biggest segment of the population. In the United States, maybe around 80 or 90 million people. You look at China, I think it's 400 million people. India, I think it's 550 million. I mean, just massive.
It's a panel unto itself.
Yes.
We're talking about mainly U.S., but really worldwide.
Exactly. So I think you're looking at like a group of people, like as you said, is going to continuously become, have greater buying power. Obviously move up through their lives, so to speak. But at the same time, you have new generations up and coming. I think that in general, like the thing that you have to do is probably what most good business people do is they're driving 100 miles an hour looking at the road in front of them, but they're also like catching all this new information, digesting it, and then optimizing as they're going on the fly. So, it's hard to say, like, I mean, we're sitting in an era where the mediums that we use from a marketing standpoint, like the most valuable mediums, like Facebook and Instagram, 10 years ago, you didn't even know, those weren't even around. So I'm not sure I can sit here and tell you like where this goes. All I just think that you can do is just continuously digest the information, continuously digest what the new technologies are, just watch trends, A/B test your everything that you're doing, like as rapidly as possible, and as frequently as you feel makes sense, and digest that information and sit down with your colleagues and figure out what it means, and go and A/B test those hypotheses. And I just think that's, I think that's I can't tell you.
Yeah, incredible. Vlad, what do you think?
Yeah, I think there's one of the keys is to create an environment where you're going to make, and I hate this expression, fail hard and fail fast, but you need to make a lot of mistakes, because in those mistakes is where you will find that next innovation. So by putting a lot of, unfortunately, in some cases, you're going to see a lot of subpar content, that is the place in which you will find the next level of exceptionalism. So there's a lot of luck involved, and just by exposing yourself to as many different scenarios as possible, you will eventually strike upon that luck. So knowing that we don't know and that we're in a state of constant flux is probably the only certainty that we have right now. So just always experiment, A/B test, and always try to be obsessed with what's new and next, but at the same time, fundamentally know who you are, what your core principles are, and set up an operational framework that is light, that is quick to respond, but at the same time is very, very stable and steady, so that you can always know that it will be there, both with the right people in place and with the right systems in place. You just light and fast.
It's incredible.
Yeah. So the one thing I would say that I feel is definitely going to be a part of the future. It's here now, but it's only going to get more important and will be, I think, kind of a minimum requirement, even, 5-10 years from now, is personalization. I think the idea that, millennials, especially as they age into this, huge buying population, will accept anything less than something that, is really tailored to their needs, and whether that's done, like in our case, we use an algorithm on the back end to, portion every meal exactly to that dog's everything, breed, age, weight, body condition, activity level. We identify the right ingredients that should be in the meal, et cetera. How that translates to retail, obviously that will shift because it won't be as customizable, but there'll still be an element of that, and that's what we're developing right now. But I think that, we've seen, like, with the vending machines, Coke is now doing it where you can customize your Coke, 100 different ways. I think we'll see more of that even in the offline world, and I think online it'll just, like, the bar will raise in terms of how much we need to personalize. We used to talk at Pet Plate about customizing, now we talk about personalizing, and because it's really being driven by what the consumers tell us they want. And so that's a pressure that I don't think will get, less. I think it's just gonna become more of a challenge in front of companies going forward.
I've heard this theme several times, but personalization and creating an experience, a really very different approach
Yeah.
to how we, bring our products to market
Yeah.
for millennials. And the future is really incredible. If you think back to where we've been maybe the past 10, 15, even 20 years, to where we are now, so much has changed, so much has evolved. You can imagine what's going to happen in the next 15, 20 years. It's really incredible. Well, how about some questions? If anyone has any questions for the panel, please.
First of all, great panel.
Thank you.
I think it's amazing what each of the three of you guys have built. It's no small feat to create products, build a brand, a company. So kudos to each of you. And you're humble about it too, about the challenges. So it was really enjoyable listening. So it's really hard to build a business, and yet at the same time, there's no barriers to entry, right? I mean, as Vlad, you said, G Suite, you use G Suite, people use AWS, and anyone can come in and supposedly do what you do in each of your respective product areas and subsectors. So talk to us a little bit about how you do create the moat and the barrier to entry around what you do. How do you do that when it's so easy for someone to actually come in and compete?
I mean, for us, we are obsessed over this because we have three very close competitors that are, together we are now forming a legitimate category in pet food. And, we are all raising money because these are capital intense businesses that require a lot of outside capital till we get to a break even point. And it's the first question an investor will ask is, well, how are you different than the others?
Mm-hmm.
And so we look at, the kind of traditional things, so product, packaging, positioning, branding, and we do make delivery system, and we do make sure we have something that differentiates us in each of those areas. Because it would be easy to just fall into what everybody else is doing, especially if you feel like, well, maybe they're doing it that way, because it's cheaper, or it's faster, or it's easier. But what we do is we look at what our consumer is telling us, what they value, what they prioritize, making sure that remains a part of the DNA of our business, but constantly looking for how do we take that and make it our own, and how do we then look and feel different from the other products. And we've been successful at that. We're the smallest of the 4 players in this category, but today we're the only company using a certain type of packaging. All the others have gone in a different direction using identical packaging, and packaging becomes a big part of the whole experience of pet food. It's one of the challenges that consumers have right now with pet food. So we've created a system that's extremely user-friendly, very humanized, and I think somebody else had said this, Vlad mentioned this with Lolly, our packaging costs a little bit more, but it is allowing us to kind of, I think, outpace our competitors. So in the end, it will be a very good investment, and at scale, it won't make a difference, in terms of cost. So you have to pick and choose your battles, and I think differentiation is hugely important.
So I think there's two pieces to this. One, we discussed, and Jesse brought this up, is looking at the skills that you have and the team that you have around you. So our founder, Tina Hedges, she comes from the mainstream beauty industry, and she was head of product development for, I want to say Estee Lauder, but so she has that really strong product development background. So we don't necessarily need to spend as much time and money working with an outside lab to develop the products, but she knows which formulas are going to work right off the bat. I come from a supply chain, and I come from an operations background, so I'm able to bring a certain level of, truthfully, mistakes made in the past where we can avoid them now. So that's the first piece. What is the talent that you have, and what is the talent need that you're trying to address? The second piece of the puzzle, the other piece of it, is constantly asking ourselves, who am I kidding? And that is such a fundamental question, because right now we're talking about using sustainable and compostable packaging. But we're using bioplastics. Are bioplastics any better? Yes, they can compost, but at the same time, is it adding more carbon to the environment? So if we're constantly challenging ourselves to ask the question, then we're actually anticipating the next questions that the market is going to be asking, and we can head them off and address them ahead of time instead of being reactive to them, which I think a lot of other companies in the market will be.
So I think the definition of moat has kind of evolved over the years. You know, like, how valuable are patents really? You know, like, there's this IPR now. I mean, I a couple years ago was involved in an IPR. I mean, you could, in my opinion, probably blow 80% of the patents up in the world with, you know, $250,000 to $350,000. So, you know, it's I would say your moat is understanding the USPTO and how the game is played within there, and developing a strategy around that, and not like thinking that you have a bulletproof patent, because in my opinion there are no bulletproof patents. You know, there's plenty of tactics that can be taken pre-issuance and post-issuance that can make your life miserable. And so it's a matter of understanding what the USPTO lays out, having an IP and trademark strategy that kind of works for you, and that you can, I mean, I personally am not looking to get offensive with patents, but using it as a defensive mechanism, I think is number one, and it is one thing, but separately, and I think the most important things are being first to market, having a great brand, having a team. I mean, I always say to people, like, I don't care who else is out there. Like, I'm a sports guy, let's get between the lines and play the game. I believe I'll bring a better team and a better product to the court, and I will beat your team on the court. Yeah, I have this IP and trademark stuff in case someone wants to, you know, play around or whatever it is. I can use it as bargaining chips, but I think it's just really understanding everything that goes into a business, and leveraging and incorporating it into your strategy, and leveraging that, and making sure you have a good overall strategy when it comes to building a moat. But I guess in the original terms of building a moat, where you had all this IP, like, again, I think 80% of IP could be blown up with a couple $100,000.
Any other questions? Yes, in the back.
First off, I echo Julie. That was an excellent panel.
Thank you.
So I have a question. Where do you guys see kind of the landscape going? I think, Gertrude, you touched on this a little bit about the next wave of trends. We've touched on customization, but what else does anyone feel kind of is the next trend wave, since you're right at the forefront of seeing that?
Well, I think, especially as it relates to direct-to-consumer brands that really do control that customer relationship, two things. One is you really want to, customers value simplicity, and so one-stop shopping. So to the extent that your brand can develop into different product lines, and so that they don't have to go to 3 different sites to, you know, take care of their pup, that's really important. So while we would love to just really say in the entree business, because it's like a very, you know, high, you know, ticket, we know we have to add treats, we'll have to add supplements, we get a lot of requests for dental products. You know, as they become loyal, because there is a level of loyalty to the brand, they are, you know, over time, less and less interested in shopping other brands. And so it becomes incumbent on the small company to think through what are those other product offerings. And so I think, you know, getting into a diversified product line sooner than you would if you launched offline, where that you know, barrier to like adding other products becomes, you know, is much more difficult. And I think the other thing that I would just kind of intersect with that, which is related, is data. So we collect a lot of data. It's easy for us to do because that data is put to good use. We're customizing a plan for their pup. But what that data can also be used for is like amazing. Like not just to upsell, cross-sell our products, other people's products, but when we think about the amount of data we're going to amass over the next 5 years and how that could be utilized by whether it be a buyer or et cetera, if it's put to good use and to the benefit of the consumer, I think that's a win-win. So it's sort of those two things are what we're constantly thinking about as we move forward.
That's a real, again, if we had a crystal ball, then we'd all be much wealthier than we are today. That being said, I think that we're seeing, one of the trends that we're seeing is a cross-pollination between industries. So we're a food-grade beauty company. Who cares if our beauty products come from the food industry? But people right now think, well, if I'm putting it on my skin, it's ending up in my body, so it needs to be to the quality of food. Who cares if dog food is human grade? But at the same time, people do, because they're starting to understand that what they're doing to themselves is going to be relevant to every other piece of their life, which in this case is their furry children. And so one thing that we're seeing is definitely food is leading the way. So what used to matter, you used to have organic foods, now you have organic hotel rooms. You used to have, so really looking where food is going, and I think they're really trendsetters for what people care about, because that's the first step of answering the fundamental question for the consumer of what's in it for me. And the first decision they make is what they eat, and then that impacts across the board everything else that they're doing. So yeah, I think it's a really good question. I think if all else fails, look at what the food industry is doing, especially on the cutting edge, and then see it trickle down across all of the other industries. That's the best advice I can give.
Yeah, I mean, I think, to Gertrude's point, you see some consolidation or some building out of product lines. I think that's the natural next step for a lot of these direct-to-consumer brands. I think there's challenges there, like when you get into multiple products in your subscription business, do these all last the same amount of time so you can leverage all the cost efficiencies that you need to leverage in order to deliver a profitable package to someone. So there's challenges there in just going and kind of building out your product portfolio. I think you'll see more changes. Like, I think there's a lot of demand for some bigger changes, like the availability of really sustainable materials that you can be used for production, or really kind of more kind of ecosystem type changes that allow companies like us to tap into those, whether it's materials or ingredients or whatever it is, but kind of things that are going to change on that end. But I also think that we're living here in America. You go to China, you go to other parts of the world, like they're still kind of, I don't want to say catching up, because they're obviously very mature economies, but from the digital standpoint, like there's a lot of there's a lot of opportunity, I would say, in some other countries, and I think for us, like a natural evolution at some point in the next 24 to 36 months is really looking at some of these other economies and saying, how do we get Chinese people to wear deodorant, because it's just not a product in China, things like that.
If there are more questions, the panelists will be here. Please bring them up. But I do have one last question. It's a real easy one. Haven't they been incredible? It is an amazing panel. It is not